Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Donnelly with Barrier-Free Contractors. This is the Accessible Barrier-Free Homes channel, and I combine it with the Accessing My Home podcast to get two for the price of one. We speak with some of the best collaborators, people that have a tremendous caring for those with disabilities and physical challenges, both in the mobility world, advocates, and just in general, some fantastic people. Today, we're speaking with Leber, a universal design specialist and a huge advocate for helping people with disabilities. Gene, I want to thank you for being here. You're a wheelchair user and you've gone through a lifetime of mobility challenges. We'd love to hear some of your stories and specifically what got you to where you are here today. So thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. As far as my story goes, 43 years ago, sometimes I just can't believe that time has flied that fast. I was accidentally shot in the back and rendered paraplegic. And so that day, of course, changed my life forever. So I had to learn a lot about what a disability was, how to cope with a disability, and how to live with it day in and day out. So that was a real challenge at first, adapting to a wheelchair and learning how to operate a wheelchair and understanding where I could and couldn't go back then. And it was a lot of places I couldn't go. So it opened my eyes to what the world is not made for individuals in wheelchairs. That's for sure.
Gene, where did all this happen?
I was born and raised in Monroeville, Ohio, which is just a little town outside of Sandusky, Ohio. A lot of people will be familiar with Sandusky, Ohio, probably because of Cedar Point, being a huge amusement park in the country. So after going through 6 months of rehab and learning how to operate a wheelchair, how to transfer in and out of a wheelchair, how to take care of my body physically, my next challenge was to find a place to live. And at that point, my mom and dad had to add a complete room onto their home with a wooden ramp that was built and expand their bathroom for just my use. And when I look back on the modification that my parents did 43 years ago, they did a good job, but if I were to today try to use that facility, it would have been inaccessible in today's standards. So I look back on that.
How old were you then?
I was 21 years old, living back at my parents' house, and like I said, my dad did a lot of the modification himself, and he thought he was doing a good job, which he did at the time for the time. But when I look back at it, we had a huge lip going into the shower, and I remember having to do a wheelie to put my wheels into the shower first before I could transfer onto this old rickety shower chair that my dad found at, I don't know if he found it at the junkyard, but he found it somewhere. And I used that for almost a year and did that same technique every single time I showered at my parents' home.
You got to be one hell of a wheelchair user, didn't you?
I did. I became really good with transfers, scary transfers. It was a learning technique, that's for sure. Almost like anything, I think individuals like myself and others, you have to experiment first and get your technique down almost anywhere you go as far as trying to use a restroom facility. because everything's different. And it's really understanding of how you position yourself and where you feel comfortable in transferring from your chair to say onto a toilet or off the toilet. It makes your technique a little bit sharper.
So okay, so you come through all these years and you've learned more than pretty much everybody I know about how to do certain things. So along the way here, just, in a little short time, can you give us your insight as to where you were then and to where you are now?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about this and speaking to a friend about this not too long ago. And, where I started picking up ideas of how to create an accessible environment for myself and for others was when the ADA was passed, and start looking at the requirements of the ADA and how the bathrooms had to have certain grab bars and turning radius and sinks lowered and pipes covered. That got me thinking to the point of, okay, you could take that same federal law and then use those techniques into a residential home. And that's when I started getting really creative of how to make a accessible environment to live in without it looking like it's an institutional facility.
That's that's a great story. All right. So another quickly, talk about your pods. That's one of the most amazing stories I've heard, and what you did to create an accessible environment for children. Go ahead. I shouldn't even talk. You guys take it from there.
Well, I was a director of a Center for Independent Living, and at that time, I was, learning a lot about and advocating for a lot of accessibility. And one of the issues that came to my desk was playgrounds. How children with disabilities weren't being inclusive into the playground equipment. So thinking about how I could make a change there, I actually resigned my position from the center and took the accessibility issues of playground as the ADA was starting to develop an inclusive playground system. I just took the full advantage of knowing that was happening to take the full use of the law, and then start looking at how can I make playgrounds accessible. So what we decided to do was we had to make it inclusive, first of all. So what we did was the challenge we came up with is that we would develop what we call pods. All right. And each and every pod, you could go from one pod to the next pod if you were a wheelchair user. Okay. And then we would develop from each and every one of those pods, we would develop something that each and every person, with no matter what their disability was, could utilize something in those pods. And then as we started getting more and more creative, one of the things that we decided to do, and we were the first in the country to do this, was that we looked at the city in which we were installing these playground systems. And so we decided that we would make each pod an historical pod about the city. So if the city had, if they were known for, say, their medical facilities, we would take a pod and we would develop, say, an ambulance theme or a doctor's office theme, and make that just one pod. And then we always had one pod that had every disability, had the Braille sign on, so you can You could learn, see how people read with Blair or Braille. And then you could, then we had, for the, I'm thinking here, what else we had? For the visually impaired, we had these huge telescopes that they could utilize that would bring items super close. And so then we would then take another pod, and that would be say what the city that we were actually doing the playground system in, and make that pod about them. And one of the things, and give you an example of that is one of the playground systems we did where I was living at the time, Dayton, Ohio, and of course that's where the Wright brothers came from. So we developed a pod all about the Wright brothers and their design of flights, and people just fell in love with these designs and how this design came out. And then the last thing we always did with all of our playground systems is that we rubberized the flooring of the pod. Because for me, when my kids were little, all they used to do around playground systems would be the little wood chips. Well, I couldn't get through those wood chips. My kids were hurt. So we came up with a surface that was made from crushed tires. And we had a soft surface that if any kid fell off a pod, they'd be falling onto a really soft surface.
Wow. Well, when are you going to write the book?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I've been asked that many times.
Oh, really? Have you? Yeah.
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 And, it's a story that I could tell that would, encompass and people be able to relate to it. And they would say, because there's a lot of tricks along the way that I learned and have shared with a lot of people who have said to me, oh, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, and I in general, talking to you, I pick up nuggets of information across the board that, well, this is what I'm into. I love every minute of doing this, and be able to talk to a guy like you just enhances my life, and I appreciate that. So thank you for all this good stuff. There's more to come. I've got more interviews with Gene, folks. So if you wouldn't mind, subscribe to our channel. That's very important. The more subscriptions we get, the more voices we get out there to broadcast a message. Gene, thanks a bunch, bud. We'll be talking soon.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.